All right, students, today we're going to talk about sighting techniques. And sighting techniques are really cool. If you've ever seen an artist with a pencil in their offhand, closing one eye and their arm totally outstretched, what they're doing is actually taking some very detailed measurements that translate into the drawing or painting that they're working on. So let's talk about how that works. So if you have a pencil in your offhand and you want to take a measurement of something, you put the top of the pencil on the top of the object, and you take your thumb, which is holding the pencil, and you slide it down and pinch it off right at the bottom. That gives you a measure, a piece of measure that you can use to essentially measure everything else in the picture. To make it easier, I'm going to go ahead and use a skewer stick, and so my thumb isn't in the way, I marked it off with a little piece of black Sharpie. Okay, so that's my unit of measure right there. Now, using that measurement, I can go ahead and measure this bar right here. And when I do, I notice it falls a little short. I go ahead and move it over to here, and I can see that that bar is actually 1.5 units of measure long. How about this one right here? If I put it at the top, 1, 2, looks like this bar is 3 units of measure long. So just by knowing this piece right here, I can measure all the other pieces in this space. So how about an object that's a little bit different in shape? Here we have a triangle, and sorry, stuff's in the way. I'm going to go ahead and measure the height. It looks like it's 1 unit of measure. And I can use that same measurement down here. There's 1. And it looks like the bottom is 2, precisely. Perfect. So using the same unit of measure that I used over here, I could also measure the height and width of this triangle. So how does that translate into things that you might be seeing in your drawingscape, your subject matter? So here we have a sort of pedestal shape, a sphere, the angle of the back of the table, and then some cast shadows, that sort of thing. I could go ahead and measure the width of the side of this, and sure enough, look, happens to be 1 unit of measure. Of course, for the sake of illustration, I've made it easier by sort of predetermining these widths. But let's take that unit of measure and determine how long is this leading edge right here. Turns out, oops, let's go this way. I don't want to get my hand in the way. There's 1, and sorry, 2. Okay, interesting. How about this side? If I lead it up with that black mark, it's about half the width of that stick. So it's a half unit of measure. So I can take that and build the proportions of this, and the height of the object. Okay. So how else could I use, oh wait, let's step it back a little bit. How about the sphere over here? Sure enough, it happens to be 1 unit of measure, and the distance between the box and the sphere is about half. So about a half unit of measure between here and there, just like this is a half unit of measure from here to here. So how else can we use our measuring stick as a measuring tool? So besides just finding, for example, distances, we could use it as a protractor. So when it's out in front of you, you can twist it. Make sure that you lay it flat and that you're not tipping it forward or backwards or anything to give you skewed results. You want to keep it flat to what you're looking at, just like you would be on a piece of paper. You could lay it along the edges here. And then I can take that, move it over to the side, and recreate that same angle. Here and here. I can take this, lay it along this edge, and I can move it over here and recreate that angle as well. So pretty soon I can start finding the angles. Here's one here. And I could use this for buildings. I could use it for any kind of geometric objects that have these angles, and I could recreate them. Down here, you can notice this one's quite steep. I can bring it over here to my drawing paper and draw it like so. Okay. Additionally, you're going to find that shadows, when cast on the floor, come off from the object at very particular angles. And you can also use your measuring stick to measure those. Something like a round sphere, you might want to just find the center line of that shadow and use that as a way to figure out what angle that round sphere, elliptical shadow is coming up from the round sphere. All right. So here's some objects that aren't as neat and tidy. Let's see if I can get them in the camera. So we have an apple and some bottle here. And I don't know, let's go ahead and just use the apple as our new unit of measure. I'm going to go ahead and kind of mark this off. Again, I don't want to use my thumb because I don't want to get it in the way, but let's say that's our new unit of measure. So pretend like you've slid your thumb down and captured that distance right there. What then can I find out about this bottle? How many units of measure, how many apples tall, essentially, will that be? There's one, goes to there, 2. So 2 units of measure, 1, 2. It's about 2 units tall. Cool. All right, what if I was to use this distance? You don't have to stay with the same unit of measure throughout the drawing. You can keep finding different things to make comparisons to. So I'm going to go ahead and use the width of this bottle and compare it to the gap between the apple and the bottle. And what does it come out to? Well, it's not neat and tidy. It's not exactly half. It's something more like 2/3. But at least you know that this gap is about 2/3 of the distance of this bottle. So that gives you a much better idea of how much space to leave right here. Make sense? Now, there's one last thing that you can do. So over here, we had nice, tidy sort of angles to measure to, the corners of the box. But oftentimes when you're doing a still life, you don't always have that information. In this one, let's see if we can get it back to where it was. Good. Yes, there is the edge of the table here, and we can go ahead and lay our measuring stick along there to find that angle. But what else could we measure? Let's see if I can turn this a little. Shoot. Well, mapping refers to taking and finding an angle, like an implied angle, from, say, laying your pencil right on the top of this bottle and then laying it right on the top of that apple. And you get an implied angle there, which you can, certainly draw on your paper. And if you do that, you're able to sort of triangulate the angle from here down to here. You can also do the same thing from the bottom of the bottle. Lay it on the extreme of the bottom of the bottle and the extreme on the bottom of the apple. And again, you get another angle that runs along this way. The angles of the shadows, you can see how they run off. And all that stuff, once you've found it, can be taken over, placed on your drawing paper, and recreated. Just draw it with a pencil mark, and you can start recreating all the angles that you're seeing. That, in combination with the sizes that you're finding, with the units of measure, you'll be able to recreate a really accurately proportionate representation of the stuff that's in front of you. Okay, students, so let's see how this translates into real life. I'm gonna take a view here so that you can see me doing my sighting. And first of all, I'd like to figure out what is the best composition, horizontal or vertical, for this layout. So I've got my viewfinder here, and I can zoom in and out. This actually looks pretty nice here. You can't see the whole viewfinder in the camera, unfortunately, but you get the idea. I can do it vertically, but this also looks quite nice, has a nice layout, and you get some of the cast shadows, which tell a lot of the story of the scene. So I think I'm gonna go ahead and draw mine in the horizontal format, okay? Now, take your measuring stick, and remember, it's really important that it's out at full length. Your arm must be locked, your elbow. Otherwise, as you can see, here, I'll go ahead and do a little measurement here. If your arm's not locked, that distance is gonna be quite different every time. So you make sure it's completely locked. So let's do a measurement here. I'm gonna do one across the face of the box, from that edge to that edge, and compare it to this box over here, this side of the box. And it looks like it's exactly about half. So whatever this distance is here, this side of the box over on this side, that's gonna be half. Okay, using that same unit of measure, I'm gonna go ahead and try to see how tall the box is. So I'm taking that leading edge, there's 1 and 2. Let's double check that. Make sure my elbow's locked. Okay, 1, there's 1, 2. It looks like about 2 to go from the bottom edge, or the bottom point here, to that top of the leading edge there. How about the space between this box and that box? A little triangle shape right here. Okay, I'm gonna take a look at that. It's a little bit smaller than 1. In fact, let's go ahead and change our unit of measure. I'm gonna go ahead and pick this one right here, this side of the box, compare it. It's a little bit longer than this edge. So if I was drawing this edge on my paper, I would know that the back half of this triangle would need to be a little bit longer, that gap, okay? And I can go ahead and do that for multiple things throughout this drawing. You know, I could use, for example, the distance here across this face and compare it to how far is this leading edge from the edge of the box. It's a little bit longer than this space here. But your brain makes a lot of assumptions, and if you're not making measurements to check, you might draw this part right here too long. Because your mind kind of knows it's a long box, so you tend to want to pull it out further than it's supposed to go. So instead, really measure what you're seeing, and then that'll give you better accuracy. Okay, and additionally, what I'll be doing is using this as a protractor, laying it along edges of boxes to find their angles, to see that linear perspective in space. When I go over to this edge, notice it's slightly steeper. This one's steeper than this one. This one right here. And as I go up here, notice this one is more like this. Very subtle, but there's a difference between this angle up here and the angle down here. Now I'd take those angles, and as soon as I find them, I would move this measuring stick over to my paper and record it. I'd measure these, measure that, and just because I have a nice strong light source, I would go ahead and measure the angles of these shadows as well. I think those would all be nice additions to this drawing. We haven't really gotten to value yet and shading, but it wouldn't hurt to at least draw the outlines of these shadows on your paper. Okay, students, so what I'm going to go ahead and do is a demonstration of how to do this in real life with your drawing paper, just a demo here. Remember I said I was going to pick the horizontal format, so I've got my paper set up in the horizontal position. I'm just going to double check, make sure that I'm happy with my viewfinder, and give myself kind of an idea of where to start. Okay, that looks good there. All right, and that will give me the opportunity to start with a gesture. Now what I'm using is Vine charcoal, and the reason for this is because it shows up better on the paper, to be honest. You could also do this assignment in graphite. You could start with a very light pencil gesture with it, and then go back with darker, start with a 2H and build up onto it once you get your lines and measurements made with something like a 2B. But instead I'm going to use Vine charcoal, and you can choose to do it this way as well. And mainly though, because I want to make sure that you can see what my drawing looks like. So you should always have two drawing implements. One in one hand to take measurements, right? Make sure your elbow is always locked, that this is perfectly perpendicular to your line of sight. Okay, and that's not leaning forward or backwards, it's always straight up and down. And then even when you twist it to find angles, make sure that it stays perpendicular. We have a tendency sometimes to try to lay those angles out forward like that, because that's how we see them in space. But that's going to not translate very well to this paper. So you want to make sure that it stays perpendicular. You twist it like the hands of a clock, find those angles, and then that will lay nicely onto your paper like so. Okay, so to start with a gesture, just go ahead and maybe find the back of the table, draw the different angles that you're seeing. It doesn't have to be perfect. You just know there's a box here, there's a box there. There's one right here, it goes back. Okay, and essentially, I'm just trying to do here is get an idea of my composition. Make sure I'm going to fill up 80% of the paper or so. And then it looks like we got a little bit of a shadow there, maybe one there. This one goes back like that. Yeah, that looks like it works good. Maybe this needs to be up higher. Well, whatever. We'll figure that out once we start gesturing. But you can see I've got 3 boxes and room for cast shadows. So that's all figured out in the first couple of minutes, just when you're gesturing. Now, those gesture lines, remember, are just a guide. They're sort of the armature in which you build the better drawing on top of. So for Vine charcoal, you can simply just wipe it away. It doesn't all disappear. There's remnants of those lines still left on the page. You can see them quite clearly, but I'll be able to put nicer, darker lines on top of this once I take my measurements. Okay. If you're using graphite, don't worry about it, because basically your lines are going to be so light after all that you will just be able to work on top of it with darker pencil with very little erasing. Okay. All right, so take your siding tool, start putting lines down, check angles. Okay, that one should be more like so. That one like this. Check that angle there. Okay, then I want to check distances. I want to check the distance here versus the distance there. And that's about 1 1/4, 1 1/2. That looks right. One thing I want you to notice, I'm not drawing 1-to-1 scale. I'm sorry I didn't mention this before, but this is sometimes one of the most consternating things for new students when they're doing these sighting techniques. They're over here and I'll use a ruler to demonstrate. And they take a measurement, let's say they get 1 inch, and they think that means that, I've measured this part right here, that means that on my drawing, it needs to only be 1 inch wide. That's a 1-to-1 scale. That's very small, and that means I'm drawing this precisely to the scale of size that I see it. What I'm trying to do is blow my scale up. So if this was an inch and it ends up being, I don't know, several inches on this part, that doesn't really matter. I'm just still using this unit of measure versus this unit of measure, this unit of measure, this unit of measure. If I find that this leading edge is 3 of these tall, it just needs to be 3 of these tall in my drawing. It doesn't need to be the exact size that I've measured with my pencil. Otherwise it'd be much too small, much too small. Okay, so continue drawing, taking measurements, making sure things are accurate. If they're not, just put things away and correct until they look believable. This is actually a pretty easy thing for you to tell whether you're doing it right, because you spend so much of your life navigating the world, both through linear perspective and through perspective based on three-dimensional light and shadow, that when those things are off, you can really tell. You can tell because it seems surreal, it seems strange, and it feels wonky. It feels like you couldn't exist in the world that felt like that. And I need to correct that. See, that's much too steep. Let's be more like so. That goes back like that. Good. Then I continue, just keep building up this drawing. Don't be afraid to use your eraser. The gummy eraser works really good for fine charcoal. And if you're using graphite, you want to use the Faber-Castell dust-free. Voila, good. I see that tucks up right into there, into that box. Heading like so. Okay. Make sure I'm checking my angles. Erasing out any minor mistakes. Okay, now go ahead and finish off by finding the back of your table, bring that back in. Okay, and if you wish, even though we haven't covered, light and shadow yet, you can do a little bit of preliminary shading if you wish, just filling in the cast shadows as you see them. You'd be surprised how much of a story the cast shadow tells to the subject matter and how much it adds to the believability. It talks a lot about the direction of where the light is coming from, and it gives a lot more of a realism to what you're looking at here. Honestly, it's one of the best things about the illusion of drawing is shading and light and shadow, or what we refer to as value. And honestly, you don't need to take it much further than this. I know I've done this very quickly. I'm pretty practiced at it. This might take you probably about an hour, maybe even longer, depending on how particular you are with trying to find and making sure that these are all right. Now, granted, I don't want you to quit prematurely. If you are just sort of fudging it and not really putting any effort into finding these angles, it'll be very obvious to me. I'm quite good at being able to tell when angles are not correct. Because honestly, it'll just look wonky. It won't look right. But if you do this faithfully and measure each one of these angles as it should be, this is going to come out looking very accurate. And it'll be obvious right off the bat. Okay,